All right. Well, I want to thank you first for spending a little bit of time with XenTegra this afternoon. I am Phil Sellers. I run the data center practice here at XenTegra, and we call it Modern Data Center, a little different than other places. And that's a recognition in the fact that not all of your compute, not all of the things you're doing in the data center space happen in your own facility or in a colo anymore. There's hybrid cloud. A lot of people have SaaS. And so we've got a practice here at XenTegra that spans across all of those different spaces, your traditional things like VMware, hardware vendors like Dell, Cisco, and HPE and Lenovo, as well as our hyperscale partners like AWS and Azure. So here we're focused around all of those technologies so that we can help you holistically solve your hosting problems and give you solutions that move your business forward. Today we got the topic of VMware, and I know it's a timely topic. It comes up probably in half of the conversations that I have with customers on a day-to-day basis. And so that's really the genesis of today's session is let's talk about VMware. There have been changes. How does that affect you? And what's the strategy? I get so many questions from customers asking about what do I do? What's next? And so today I hope to give you a roadmap from the XenTegra perspective, what we think this looks like, what you should be considering, what you should be thinking about as you navigate through this new normal with VMware. So I'll go ahead and click and we'll get started. Let's level set a little bit. First of all, there's not a sponsor to today's webinar. This webinar is not sponsored by VMware or any of our other technology partners. So what's being said today is just what Phil thinks. This is my perspective. This is not something that we've been paid to say. So this is my impartial advice. I'll tell you a little bit more about who I am and where I come from in just a moment. But really what I'm trying to do is help you with advice, some recommendations as you're coming up on that VMware renewal. What can you look at? What are the options out there? And what makes the most sense for you? May not agree with all of the outcomes, but hey, I've got some offers at the end of it. And if you want to talk more about that and disagree with me, we can do that on a one-on-one basis and hopefully get you some of the answers that you need. So who am I? Phil Sellers. I run the data center practice here at XenTegra. I've been with the company about 2 years, but I've been in technology for about 25 years. Started out as a consultant. I worked systems administrator jobs all the way up to director of infrastructure for a large insurance company based here in Charlotte. I live in the Charlotte area still. And in addition to the things I've done for work, I also try to get back to the community as a blogger, podcaster, just generally information sharer. I like to help other people and share what I've learned so that maybe you can avoid a pitfall or two as you're working with technology. As we think about and talk about VMware as a topic, this is a hard one, right? So many of our businesses are built around what VMware has delivered as product to us. And that makes it really tough when one of your core technology partners makes massive changes. And let's be honest, VMware has gone through some massive changes in the last couple of years. I've got a little timeline here of the VMware acquisition. This thing actually started 2 years ago in May of 2022. And that's how long we've had some level of uncertainty about what's going on with our key technology partner. VMware did a really good job of solving customer problems, and so they became ingrained into our business and our day-to-day. Over the course of approximately 18 months, VMware went through tons and tons of scrutiny. Scrutiny from the European Union, from the UK, from China, and from the US. So regulatory approval as they scrutinized this deal, where Broadcom wanted to come in and buy VMware. And so we finally got to a point where we were holding just basically waiting on the Chinese regulators to approve the deal, and that was in October of 2023. We got news a month later saying, okay, everything's been approved. And so the Broadcom VMware deal closed on November 22nd, almost a year ago now. Shortly after that, though, they came out and they said, okay, this is our new packaging. And so we'll talk a little bit about that new packaging. That's impactful to you and how you buy VMware products. So we'll talk about that packaging. But we also found out that they're going to spin out two of the other portions of their business. I'll use this terminology. VMware is a portfolio company. And that just means that they've got a large portfolio of software solutions to solve different customer needs. Two of those were earmarked to be spun off. So one of those is their EUC, or their desktop virtualization platform known as Horizon, along with Workspace ONE. So the EUC space was earmarked to be sold, and also Carbon Black, their security products, were also earmarked to be sold. Carbon Black was a company that they had purchased a few years prior and integrated in and started to use that security across multiple different product lines. But they decided, okay, we're going to spin this off. And they attempted to solicit bids for that business and ultimately decided to combine it with another business unit already owned by Broadcom, known as Symantec. Symantec, most of us know the Norton products of security. Norton antivirus became synonymous with antivirus in the early days. And so Symantec, also owned by Broadcom, is where the Carbon Black products moved. And that brings us to today, right? You're probably looking at things in terms of your VMware spin, trying to understand what's the right strategy for me and how do I move forward. For most people looking for change, they may think that it's as simple as replacing the hypervisor. VMware has kind of been known as the hypervisor company. They created this software to help you run multiple servers on a single piece of hardware. But the hypervisor is not really the issue. When I talk to customers, they talk about replacing VMware and they think it's just the hypervisor, right? Because a lot of customers, that's all they're using. They're just using a portion of the VMware portfolio, not a lot of the VMware products. And so they think it's as simple as dropping in a different hypervisor and moving on. But I think it's a lot more than just that. And we're going to delve into that a little bit more. The switch has a lot more to do. But as I said, VMware is a portfolio company, right? They're synonymous with that virtual machine. They invented this space. They invented the hypervisor. But they've expanded so far beyond that. When we talk about the hypervisor, that lives in this lower left-hand corner called cloud infrastructure on screen. But as you can see, they had all of these other products inside of the company. Now, this is a snapshot of the products in VMware as of the acquisition at the beginning of 2023 or 2024, end of 23, beginning of 24. This is kind of what they looked like. So there were a lot of different divisions solving a lot of different problems for customers, but most customers stayed in this blue box on the bottom left. Maybe you had some VMware Workstation, maybe you did some security with them, but most VMware customers were living in this blue box on the left bottom of the screen. As we talked about, they decided they were going to divest part of their company. So the things in purple and the things in gray, both of those became parts of a divestiture. They were going to sell those parts off. And then as Broadcom started to come in, their strategy was to bring everything together. So as I said, shortly after close, they announced new packages. Those new packages are called VMware Cloud Foundation, which is technically not new. That's been around for a while. The current version is version 5 of VMware Cloud Foundation, and it really is just a package. So I used the same color code as the previous slide, and you'll see VMware Cloud Foundation has components from multiple different parts of the VMware portfolio. There's some networking, there's the cloud infrastructure, there's Tanzu, which is part of the cloud native development part, and then there's ARIA, which is part of the monitoring and management plane. So What they did is they wanted to simplify the way they went to market. And there's another slide we get as a partner from Broadcom, and it shows 165 different SKUs, different base SKUs, now simplified to basically 4. So these are 2 of the 4. One is called VMware Cloud Foundation. It's kind of the everything in the kitchen sink 2 SKU. And then there's VMware vSphere Foundation. And so this product is going to be closer to what you're used to today with vSphere Enterprise Plus, but it's going to have some additional components here. You know, VMware had a product called vSOM, or vSphere plus Operations Management. So that's kind of the top and bottom of vSphere Foundation, the ARIA Operations plus the vSphere Enterprise Plus. And basically that gave you operations along with the vSphere. But in the Broadcom era, they're really pushing hyperconverged, they're pushing vSAN, which brings external storage into your servers and uses software to basically allow you to have storage redundancy inside of your nodes. So that, along with Kubernetes for everybody, is what makes up vSphere Foundation. So as you go through your renewal cycle, even if you have a large multi-year ELA, you're not going to be able just to renew vSphere Enterprise Plus. You're going to have to look at one of these 2 packages. And so that's part of the cost increases that you're hearing about. Yes, the prices are going up. Your renewal is going to be more expensive, but you're also entitled to more product. You're entitled to more features and functionality. We'll talk about that as a strategy in a little while. But the main thing to know is that the tried and true perpetual software that you've always purchased from VMware, that's no longer available to you. It's gone away. And so most enterprises are going to find themselves in one of these 2 packages. There are 2 more packages I haven't talked about and I don't have on the screen, but they're meant for lower end customers, vSphere Standard Edition or vSphere Essentials. Those 2 editions are similar, very similar to the traditional products that carried the same names. vSphere Standard has the same functionality. It's just now a subscription. And so with the subscription, you're entitled to not only the vSphere, but also vCenter. That's the primary change. But it doesn't have any of the additional software bundled with it, just vSphere Standard. Same thing with Essentials. It's a very tailored, small environment package. It goes up to a certain number of CPU cores. It starts at 96 cores, and it's sort of like an accelerator, a get started fast for a small deployment of vSphere. It is limited to 3 hosts, and so it's meant for small environments. Those 2 still exist, but they don't carry the enterprise features that Enterprise Plus carries for most customers. And so when you start talking to businesses who've been running vSphere Enterprise Plus for years, you have limited choices because it's either take a step back, lose functionality with Standard or Essentials, or it's move into vSphere Foundation or VMware Cloud Foundation. I've got a question in, and the question is it true they no longer offer perpetual licensing or charity licensing, only annual subscriptions? And that is true. So today, that is the way that VMware is going to market. So the perpetual licenses have gone away. You're no longer able to renew support on perpetual licenses. And so everything is in a subscription basis moving forward. The other huge change to understand is as you move from perpetual to subscription, you move from socket or the number of CPUs in the box to core base. So now you're paying per core on that CPU as opposed to the actual number of sockets on the motherboard. So that's also a major change, and there's some things that you need to understand when it comes to that. There's a minimum of the number of CPU cores you have to pay for every socket. And then there's also the basic case of accounting. Basically, you have scripts and things you need to run in order to show the number of CPU cores within the sockets. And so that's also a major thing for customers that had 32 core processors, they're now paying for all 32 cores. The sockets allowed you to go up to a larger limit. Now you have to pay per core. So that's going to affect some of your design and architecture decisions as you move forward in years to come. Because socket-based licenses allowed you to just buy the biggest processors you could find within 32 cores and deploy those in your data center with some level of freedom. Now, VMware by Broadcom is following suit with Microsoft and others, and they're charging you on a per core basis. So, great question. So if we look at these packages, there's one other thing I want to call out. If you look at the old and you look at the new, what you notice is that these packages basically create a hyper-converged foundation. VMware is a hyper-converged infrastructure vendor, and that's a major change to the way most people see VMware. The interesting thing is that VMware was owned by Dell. Dell sold external storage, and so to some degree, I think there's reality to people that say, VMware didn't focus on vSAN, didn't focus on their hyperconverged storage story because they were owned by Dell. Now that Broadcom has them, vSAN has come to the forefront. There's vSAN in both of these large packages. You get entitlements to that hyperconverged storage so that you don't have to buy external storage arrays. But for you as a customer, that's a major change. You've probably got existing investments, and we'll talk about a lot of the implications here. But the main thing to understand is VMware today is now a hyperconverged company. Now let's talk about the hypervisor. I said the hypervisor wasn't the problem, right? It's not just about the hypervisor. The hypervisor is a utility, a commodity. It provides you with some basic functionality, the ability to run multiple servers on a single physical server chassis. That's a huge benefit because our processors and the amount of RAM and everything else have grown so significantly that you can't utilize that hardware efficiently on a one-for-one basis, one operating system per physical device. You need virtualization. You need a hypervisor in order to really utilize the resources in every server and make that cost effective. But as you look at things like AWS and Azure, do you actually care about the hypervisor? I would argue you don't. Most people probably can't tell you what hypervisor runs in AWS or what hypervisor runs in Google Compute. That's because it really doesn't matter. You're seeking the outcome of running an application on the cloud. Now, there's necessary functionality. You've got to be able to host VMs. You've got to be able to live migrate so that you can do maintenance. And in theory, you should really want load balancing or some type of contention resolution. So if something's running hot, that it doesn't steal resources from something else, another workload on the same box. But businesses don't actually care. IT may care. IT teams, infrastructure teams may care. They may care about the hypervisor, but the business partners you're serving, they don't actually care about which hypervisor you're running on. What they care about is the outcome you're providing. And so the workload becomes the key to the discussion. What other switching factors are out there? If the hypervisor is not the main concern, well, what is? Your opinions about storage, that's really important. Your existing hardware investments are extremely important and probably going to be the critical factor for your decisions around your future. Support and the ecosystem around a company like VMware is also extremely important. And then there's the cost of change. We're going to delve into these real quick. So let's talk about storage. Two really big camps inside of the IT industry. There's 3-tier or external storage, and that's going to have storage arrays sitting separate from your servers, connected over some sort of network connection so that you can run your virtual machines. And then there's hyperconverged. And in this, we use disks in the server with software to create a distributed storage system. So instead of having a separate connectivity, separate arrays, we now use the internal resources of a server, the local disks, plus software to create and fulfill that need for shared storage when you're hosting. So hyperconverged has become a very popular way, but I would argue it's not the most common way to host. Most VMware customers are probably still running 3-tier. The numbers support that. When I look at research from IDC and Gartner and other research firms, the numbers support the fact that most customers are still running in 3-tier. And why change, right? This works for so many customers. For so many people, this is what they know and it works great. But we also just heard that VMware is a hyperconverged company. So where does that leave you? That leaves you paying for software features that you may not necessarily consume. You're going to be licensing vSAN because it's part of your entitlement, whether you use that functionality or not. If you're using 3-tier storage, you're going to have vSAN entitlement. Now it's up to you whether you get benefit from that. But the end of the line is you get to pay for it. So next factor, hardware investments. As I said, this may be the biggest limiting factor when you weigh your options. Budget cycles for hardware, generally 3 to 7 years, expected life for servers and for storage. That differs. I certainly have customers that sweat their assets longer, but I also have, customers that do a strict 3-year, or they may do a 1.5 years every time Intel comes out with new chips, and then take, their tier 1 servers and move them to tier 2. But in general, budget cycles are generally 3 to 7 years, and that's what we expect from a depreciation on an asset. Traditional storage arrays generally have a really large increase in their maintenance, their hardware maintenance after 5 years. And so you see a lot of those high bills for maintenance renewals help customers justify, refreshing and buying new storage. Businesses early in their hardware cycle without some sort of an imminent refresh, you're going to have less choices. And what I mean by that is if you're 3-tier, it's going to be harder for you to switch to hyperconverged. It's one of those things that you've got a strategy, whether intended or not, based around your current architecture, especially if you're early in the cycle of your spend on this hardware. So any potential changes that you need to this strategy, you're going to need to align to your hardware refresh cycles. And I'll go a step further. I think to your server refresh cycles, because that's where you can potentially make the most difference as you may want to change strategies. The next piece I highlight is support and the ecosystem. Now, this is a huge one for me. VMware has millions of deployments. It's battle tested. VMware support's also changing though. In the future, your VMware support is going to be handled by a distributor, not necessarily by VMware direct. The experience shouldn't change. The experience should stay the same, but support's critical, right? When something goes wrong, when there's a software bug or when something breaks in your environment, who do you call? How many other people are out there running it? How much road experience is on this software? Because that goes to stability. The more people using it, the more diverse environments that have it, the more likely a problem will be fixed before you encounter it. Another critical thing, do you have phone support as an option? Something to ask. As you look at alternative solutions, do they support everything that you need? You've got needs that are critical. You may have compliances that require you to have certain things in the IT environment. So are there partners in the ecosystem? There's a diverse, large ecosystem around VMware because it has become the standard. As we said, it's synonymous with virtualization and with VMs. So is there an ecosystem around the potential solution that you're looking at? As we talk about that ecosystem support, there are a few things that really matter. Your future solution must have backup, disaster recovery, monitoring, security, compliance, and patching. All of these things are non-negotiable, particularly if you find yourself in one of the verticals that has compliance rules. How many of you listening have payment cards, take credit card payments? PCI dictates that you have to be patched within a certain time period and that you have to run supported versions of software. So these compliance rules that you find yourself underneath, they're also important, but checking every one of these boxes is critical for you as you look at that new solution. As of January of this year, VMware had 84% of all hypervisor deployments. That's a startling statistic, and it's going to change this year, and VMware knows that. But because it is the standard, because it holds so much of the market, it's also got the richest ecosystem. You've got partners for solutions around every one of these different areas. So what does the ecosystem look like for your potential solution? Now, said all of that to come back to the point that I don't think the hypervisor is the critical issue. So what are the other hypervisors? What are your options? Well, the most prevalent out there is probably Hyper-V from Microsoft. Been around for a long time. I think it was introduced in 2012, 2013. And so Hyper-V has come a long way. It still exists as part of the Microsoft Windows operating system. Now, you'll have heard Microsoft's moving away from Hyper-V. Oh no, it's discontinued. It's going away. There's nuance to that. Hyper-V Server 2019 was the last standalone version of Hyper-V Server, which was a particular distribution for Hyper-V, but Hyper-V as a technology is still alive and well, and is still in Microsoft's roadmaps. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Xen. The open source Xen project provided a hypervisor that a lot of people used early in the hypervisor wars. Now, Xen was taken over or adopted by Citrix and became Xen Server. Xen Server became a product that a lot of Citrix shops may have toyed with to run the full Citrix stack, and that's still an option. There's also an open source version of Xen called NCP-NG. That's also out in the marketplace. And then after the things changed with Citrix taking on Xen, the open source market kind of moved to a new technology called KVM. And KVM has become a really common open source platform for hosting virtual machines. And so you find that underneath the covers in a lot of different distributions, including Nutanix AHV, Scale Computing, Proxmox. You'll see it paired with OpenStack and lots of other distributions. So KVM has become one of the widest open standards for virtualization. Now, that said, we also just learned that 84% of the market, hypervisor market, is VMware. That leaves these three contending for 16% of the market. And I said, it's important to me to know that this is battle tested, that lots of people have run this and that lots of people have encountered problems so that I don't encounter the problems. What I don't want to feel like is I'm beta testing the solution that my business critical apps are running on. That's not a great place for any IT department that's trying to meet the business objectives of our partners. Next thing I'll say, if you're 3-tier, you've got limited options. KVM is more or less off the table. There are really only two alternative hypervisors that support external storage. You got Hyper-V and you got Xen Server. Now, as I said, contrary to the news, Hyper-V is not dead. It continues to be a feature inside of Windows Server. It's also a critical part of something Microsoft calls Azure Stack HCI. There's that HCI term again. So just like VMware has become a hyper-converged company, well, Azure Stack HCI is Microsoft's answer to hyper-converged infrastructure. It uses Hyper-V. And Xen Server, that other project we talked about, Xen Server still exists. It's a business unit within Cloud Software Group at Citrix. Now, Citrix and Cloud Software Group only support Xen Server to run Citrix workloads. So Zen Server is no longer an option for you when it comes to running general purpose workloads. So hosting your applications, hosting your SQL databases, your domain controllers. It's really only supported, according to Citrix, for running Citrix Stack. So running Zen App, Zen Desktop, and what we call CBAD, and their new name for it, the Universal Multi-Hybrid Cloud. So the Zen workloads or Zen server only supports the Citrix workloads today. Now, if you're open to hyperconverged, you have more options. Most of the alternatives in this space are hyperconverged solutions. The most popular, largest percentage of market share is one from Nutanix called Nutanix Cloud Infrastructure. It uses AHV, which is a customized version of KVM. And on top of that, Nutanix Cloud Infrastructure offers support for both Hyper-V and VMware as a hypervisor. So when we talk about 84% of all hypervisors being VMware, a large percentage of those are also running on Nutanix Cloud Infrastructure. You have a choice there. Scale computing, Oracle virtualization, both of those are also based on KVM. Scale computing focuses clearly on VM hosting. That is the thing they do. So if that's all you need as a business, that makes them a really viable option. You've got open source answers with OpenStack and a software-defined storage technology called Ceph. It's an Apache product, or Apache project, I should say. Ceph you find in a lot of these hyper-converged solutions in and outside of OpenStack. OpenStack is a opinionated version of a hosting platform, a cloud platform. So you've got a hypervisor, KVM, you've got shared storage, Ceph, you've got software-defined networking and some other things all built into OpenStack. So all of these are more full-featured than just a hypervisor. They answer other questions. What does that landscape look like? Well, you've got VMware Cloud Foundation. That's an HCI distribution. You've got Nutanix Cloud Infrastructure, Azure Stack, Scale Computing. You've got new contenders like Proxmox. I'm sure you've read or heard something about Proxmox. SoftIron, Verge, Computer Vault. All of these answer the question of hosting your infrastructure by combining multiple different technologies, not just the hypervisor, but also the storage answers, the networking, and so on. And so each one of these is a total solution. Now, the difference between these is, what about market share? What about ecosystem support? Can I get product X, my answer to disaster recovery, to run on Proxmox? Can I get my backup solution to run on Verge? You've got existing investments in all of those other technologies around your hosting platform, and those need to also work. Or you need to find a new answer that supports the new stack that you're working on. That's an incredibly hard problem to solve right now because there's so much fragmentation as these new contenders are coming on the market. SoftIron, Verge, Computer Vault, they're newer to this space. Proxmox, incredibly affordable, but how many install base do they have? How many users are using this? How good is the support? I don't have answers for all those questions, but I do have some opinions. The last thing I will say is that there are costs of change. Migrations have cost. You've got to think about services. If you're going to bring in a service partner to help you with a migration, those have a hard cost. There'll be a dollar amount associated with those services. Migrations take time. That's probably one of the more valuable and constrained resources you're going to have to contend with. There's a finite amount of time. Money can often be an easier solution. Learning new platforms is also tough. That has a people cost. It can be time, but it can also be frustration. You may not be able to retrain your staff. You want things that are maintainable, operatable, that help your staff with life cycle, because VMware has spent a lot of time solving those problems for your operations teams, helping them with upgrades, It's not a perfect world, but there's been a lot of time spent answering those questions. Timelines are also important because you need time to make a switch. How long will it be before your renewal? If you're dead set on giving VMware a renewal, do you have enough time to make a switch, and do you have enough runway to go to a compelling alternative? That's also a huge thing you need to think about. An aside, there's this thing called KubeVirt that's going on. And so you may hear about this from Red Hat. It's called OpenShift virtualization. In a lot of places, VMware included, you have a hypervisor, you run virtual machines, and you can run containers and Kubernetes on top of a hypervisor. Well, this is the opposite idea. This is you have hardware, you have Kubernetes, and now you run virtual machines on Kubernetes rather than Kubernetes on a hypervisor. So this is emerging as an idea, and KubeVirt in general is an open source idea, but packaged together, OpenShift virtualization is the package where you could buy this. It works differently, it's harder. So from an operations standpoint, it's much more difficult for your teams to adopt Kubernetes and make this switch. It's also got a problem in terms of lower density. You can't run as many virtual machines on KubeVirt today as you can on a hypervisor. So if someone brings this to you as a potential pathway, just know that it's tougher and there's some issues with scale and density in this strategy. But I did want to mention it. So what do? You got this big bill from VMware. You don't want to continue paying that. You are looking for your alternatives. What does that leave you with? Well, here's a few pathways. Now, I'm going to caveat this because I'm partners with many of those companies you just saw on a slide. So I'm not pulling any punches here. I'm giving you my advice based on where you're at after you've told me you want to get off VMware. So I want to switch from VMware. Where should I go? In the small remote offices that used to use VMware Robo licensing, I think Nutanix NCI Edge licensing, which is also a per VM license, is probably your best place to look. For small and medium businesses with external storage, I think you've got some choices. Cost of change is probably higher for you because of the lack of density. And so if you're in that small to medium area with external storage, it may make the most sense for you to continue and do the VMware renewal, even at a higher cost. That's one I'd love to talk to you about more because your individual situation is going to vary greatly. And I'd love to just have a more holistic approach and conversation about your environment. That may also be somewhere where the NCI Edge from Nutanix comes into play. But again, cost of change may be high. Businesses with external storage that's less than 3 years old, I'm going to level with you. I think you're going to need to renew with VMware. If you've got existing storage investments and you need to see those through from a financial perspective, you don't have a lot of choices. 3-tier, as we said, limits the choices you have in the marketplace because there aren't good answers to drop in. So I think you're best suited sticking with VMware. And that's a hard thing I've had to tell other customers who wanted a different answer. They wanted an answer of somewhere else they could go, and there are no good answers. Now, if you've got aging external storage and you're open to things like HCI, well, then Nutanix is a great alternative for you. That said, so is VMware. VMware has the hyperconverged. You can do the same thing in the VMware stack. But again, we're starting with the premise that you told me you want off of VMware. Now, if you've got an existing hyperconverged like VxRail, SimpliVity, well, guess what? There's good news there. Some of those hardware platforms can be reused. And so Nutanix HCI can actually make use of those. They're certifying some of the VxRail hardware and some of the other hardware vendors. So there's a chance you may be able to take the existing stuff and tune it to the new style of doing it. Now, this isn't exclusive to Nutanix HCI. This can apply to other places, but let's talk a minute about why I think Nutanix is the right thing for switchers. So I've got another question. Got budget to replace storage in 2025. Our hosts have another year or more to go. Thoughts? Well, that's a great scenario. So if you're looking at storage replacement, maybe hedge your bets. Maybe go ahead and look at things you could do from an HCI perspective and look at the ability to add local drives. So take that budget for storage, maybe add it and the necessary storage cards into your existing servers, and maybe go from there. It doesn't make sense from a hardware perspective to add hardware. It's also possible to sometimes use those as compute nodes while using hyperconverged storage. So there may be a bridge that you can use. You know, a lot of the solutions we have in the marketplace can do compute only or storage only nodes. And so you could pair those together. There's a couple of different ways we could definitely talk about reuse of hardware, and that's becoming a much more common topic as we're talking with customers about where they go moving forward. So why Nutanix? Why is that my recommendation? Well, first of all, large install base. So we talked about 84% of the world's hypervisors are on VMware. Well, guess what? Over 50% of all HCI deployments in the world are on Nutanix. Huge install base. When we look at how you segment different things, you know, it's always been kind of funny to me. VMware will tell you that they've got the #1 hyperconverged. Nutanix will tell you they've got the #1 hyperconverged. They're both telling the truth because they're looking at different things. VMware can say that because they've got the #1 hyperconverged when you're looking at the hypervisor. Nutanix has got it when you're looking at the storage layer. And so neither one of them is lying, but it's all about the statistics you choose to repeat. The good news here is Nutanix has a large install base. They have a huge ecosystem. They also focus a lot on simplified operations. So if you're contending with that training issue, it's easier to pick up, it's easier to adopt. There's less friction for your management teams. It also has solutions in the portfolio to address emerging infrastructure challenges, some of which don't exist in the VMware portfolio, frankly. There's also extensive storage services. You get superior scale. And the last thing is there's a common operating model from both on-prem to cloud. So wherever you want to run this, like VMware, you can run it in any of those locations. Nutanix has also got the claim to fame that it's the same actual software stack no matter where you run it. If you run it on-prem or in AWS or Azure or at a managed service provider like XenTegra, we all run the same version of Nutanix. There are slight tweaks to the VMware stack in some of the cloud providers. So let me introduce this more. When you look at Nutanix, there is a complete portfolio. You've got the cloud infrastructure. So when we think about the stack of VCF, that's going to encompass these two light purple boxes. For the most part, very feature parity. So Nutanix has a very good feature parity for that entire stack we looked at in VCF. If you're looking just for the hosting, well, that's where the cloud infrastructure, the bottom left, comes into play. So that box is going to have the full hyperconverged story. You're going to have the storage and the ability to run virtual machines and do disaster recovery, networking, and that hypervisor. And again, we talked about the hypervisor being a commodity. At the end of the day, you care about the workload running on it, not necessarily about what's running the workload. It's stable. Lots and lots of R&D, lots and lots of support have gone into this over the last decade, making it an incredibly scalable, performant solution as an alternative for you. Now, across the bottom, there's some differentiators. Unified control plane, one place, one console to work. I was at VMware Explore this year. That's one of their futures with VCF 9 is to bring everything to a unified control panel. Nutanix has got that today. Lifecycle management is also really, really strong. So Nutanix helps you from a day two operation to patch your firmware, to patch your AHV, your AOS software, which is your storage layer. and everything else to make it easier to maintain and run over time. And it's the same across everything. And then across the top, there's other answers. We do a lot of EUC, Citrix, and things like that. Unified storage is a great answer because now we can run files and user profiles and all of that on the same cluster in Nutanix. They've got answers around database automation, and copies of databases for developers. Kubernetes, which is not shown on here other than container services, but that's one of their newer product lines with a full stack similar to Tanzu, where they have answers for everything you want to do from a cloud native standpoint. Data services is at the heart of what they're doing. That's at the heart of pretty much every product that they've got, whether you're talking databases or unified storage. They've got a holistic approach. And to me, the thing that was shocking coming into them and learning, Nutanix as a platform a couple years ago is how broad the company had really expanded. They're not just this little hyper-converged thing. And that's the thing I would encourage you is not think of hyper-converged as this little great project for robos and branch offices and things like that. It's something where you have a software mentality. It scales. It's a, I guess infrastructure as code sort of at its core. And so it gives you so much flexibility over time to adapt, to grow, and to build strong services. Everything across the top of this slide basically roots back down into this high performance storage layer. And there's some level of tie back to that. But I, along with a lot of other people, discounted this company as that little hyper converged company over there. And there's so much more value here. Last thing is you can run it anywhere. And that's a huge part of both the VMware and Nutanix story. And so when you're looking at a solution and when you're looking at a replacement, you can run either one of these stacks wherever you need to do it. Nutanix has worked really hard to have something for the edge, for the core, for the cloud. And so anywhere you need to compute, anywhere you need your workloads, you can run that. I did a really interesting podcast yesterday with someone from Nutanix. And during that recording, it'll come out in a couple weeks, we talked about AI, training a new AI model. Well, you may want to do that in cloud. You may want to load your data, train it there so you don't have to buy GPUs. You may have a specialty use case like that. Well, guess what? Now you've moved all that data to the cloud. How do you get it back? How do you use it again? And Nutanix answers that question for you. You can replicate it from there back on-prem using their native data services. And that's a differentiator. Look for those kinds of things. As you're looking for that next step, are there things you can get if you're going to move from VMware, and that's your opinion, are there benefits that you can get and bring to your business? Data portability being one of them. Avoiding lock-in through the ability to use data services. So now you can choose the right destination for what you're running. At the end of the day, there are lots of compelling things that you get from a hosting platform, but what's most important to you and your business? So I'll end with this. We've got a couple offers. So a couple different ways that I would ask you to engage. If this was interesting to you, if you want to go deeper on your specific environment, let's talk about your VMware renewal and strategy. You can book a 1-hour complimentary strategy session with me or one of the SAs here on the XenTegra and Modern Datacenter team, and we'll talk through your specific use case. 3-tier, vSAN, whatever it needs to be. We'll talk about that. And if you're in that camp where you're 3-tier and you're looking at a VMware renewal, how do you get more value out of that? Is there somewhere else that we can use what you'll be entitled to help you shift the funds from a monitoring product to that, or from Red Hat OpenShift or some other technology to Tanzu? Are there things we can do to help you in that? The other offer is schedule a demo of Nutanix. we believe in that as a platform just as much as we believe in VMware as a platform. And if you're looking to switch, it's the first place I would suggest. If you're interested in that, we do have an offer from our partner at Nutanix. There's a button at the bottom for either one of these, so you can go down here and click the button. And if you're interested in scheduling that Nutanix demo, the first 30 qualifying registrants will receive a solo stove. So they've got that as an offer for you as well. So 2 different ways that I really hope we engage. I hope you found what we talked about today useful, and I really look forward to helping you on your journey. I know this is not easy. I've been following this space for a couple of years, trying to anticipate how do I get answers when people ask the hard questions. This is where I'm at today. And these are not the only answers. There are definitely additional questions and answers that need to be had, and I'll be glad to meet with you one-on-one for those. Most of all, I hope everybody's doing okay. I know we've got a lot of weather going through the United States today, so I hope you're safe. I appreciate your time. And until next time, thanks for tuning in on another XenTegra webinar, and I hope to see you again soon.